Hat or no hat? Hat or no hat? Hat.
So hold on to your hats.
I tip my hat to you.
Go on, get your hat.
My hat and walk away?
Where's your hat?
Where's your hat?
He tipped his hat! He tipped his hat!
Ever notice how hats are kind of like the exclamation point of fashion? You could be in jeans and a t-shirt, but throw on a fedora and suddenly you're a mysterious stranger in a noir film. Or toss on a baseball cap and you're the guy grabbing nachos at the ball game. Hats say a lot without saying a word. Hey retrospective crew, this is Sentimental Cindy, and today we're tackling the fun and fascinating topic of hats and caps. Hats weren't just accessories. For centuries, hats told the world who you were, your class, your job, and your fashion sense, and even your politics. And that's where millinery comes in. Millinery is the art of hat making, and for a long stretch of history, it was serious business. Milliners weren't just sewing fabric together. No, they were shaping identity, power, and status, one brim at a time. And at one point in history, everyone, and I mean everyone, was mad about hats. So let's take a little trip through time and see how headwear went from crowns and bonnets to trucker caps and bucket hats. So buckle up, or buckle that strap under your chin, because we're about to dive headfirst into hat history. Chapter 1, A Head Start in History. If you think hats are just about keeping the sun out of your eyes, oh no, my friend. Headwear has been making statements since the beginning of time. Long before Instagram influencers and fashion blogs or vlogs, your headwear announced who you were, what you did, and just how important you thought you were. Let's start with the obvious, crowns. From the ancient pharaohs of Egypt rocking their cobra-topped headdresses to medieval kings strutting around in jewel-encrusted monstrosities, crowns were the original status symbol. Forget Gucci belts. If you had a crown, people knew you had both money and power. You didn't just walk into a room, you ruled it. Crowns were so heavy and uncomfortable, though, that some royals could barely move their necks. But hey, beauty and power is pain. Then there were helmets and warrior headgear. The Spartans had those iconic crested helmets. The Vikings had horned helmets. Well, okay, probably not, but Hollywood insists they did. Samurai had those elaborate kabuto helmets that made them look part warrior, part transformer. Sure, they offered protection, but their real job was intimidation. Picture showing up to a fight wearing a plain hat versus showing up in a helmet with horns or a scary mask. Exactly, instant fear points. Beyond war and crowns, though, hats had other roles to play. Ordinary people use hats to signal status, profession, and morality. In medieval Europe, your hat was basically your LinkedIn profile. A tall hat? Probably a wealthy merchant. A hood? Maybe a monk or scholar. Women wore wimples and veils that covered everything, signaling modesty and religious devotion. Men wore floppy caps with feathers to show flair and status. And in some eras, the bigger the feather, the bigger the ego. Whoa. Even laws got in on the action. Yep, sumptuary laws literally told you what you could or couldn't wear based on your class. Hats were so important that in some places, certain styles were forbidden unless you had the rank or money to deserve it. So imagine wanting to wear that cool new hat of the season, but a law literally says, sorry, you're too poor for that brim. Harsh. And let's not forget religion. From Jewish yarmulkes to Catholic mitres to turbans and Buddhist monks' shaved heads, what you put or didn't put on your head often connected directly to spirituality. And fashion was just the beginning. Headwear had purpose. It was faith, identity, and tradition all rolled into one. By the time the Renaissance rolled around, hats had become even more theatrical. Think giant ruffs. Those are the stiff, frilly collars from the Elizabethan era, paired with hats so wide they could block the sun for the entire town square. Nobles basically used their heads as stages for showing off. And let's be honest, if your hat didn't have feathers, jewels, or ribbons, were you even trying? So right from the beginning, hats weren't just accessories, they were statements. Crowns screamed power. Helmets said, mess with me and lose. Religious headwear whispered devotion. And every feather, jewel, or stitch added another layer of meaning. The takeaway? Hats were never just hats. They were walking billboards of your identity, long before hashtags or blue check marks told the world who mattered.
When did you become such a Victorian?
The Victorians were onto something.
Victorian.
Chapter 2. The 1800s. The bigger the brim, the better. Enter the Victorian era, where women's hats became nothing short of architectural marvels. These weren't your average Sunday stroll bonnets, though. They were wide-brimmed statements that could easily double as sunshades for the entire block. And size wasn't the only thing going over the top. Women decorated their hats with feathers, ribbons, flowers, and sometimes, yes, even entire birds. You heard that right. Taxidermy millinery was a very real trend. Imagine attending tea with a live sparrow, or well, a very still one, perched elegantly atop your head. Nothing screams sophistication quite like a deceased bird tied to your bonnet with a ribbon. Poor little birdies. But it wasn't just women getting wild and wacky with headgear. Men were having their own hat adventures, though slightly more structured. Top hats and bowlers were all the rage. Picture Abraham Lincoln with his iconic stovepipe hat. That hat became more than a fashion statement. It was a multi-purpose storage unit. Legend has it Honest Abe would stash letters, important notes, and even his spectacles inside that towering hat. Now that's what I call functional fashion. Good on you. And hats had a job beyond keeping your head warm. They told the world who you were. The bigger and fancier your hat, the higher your status. A simple bonnet? You're a middle-class miss. Rocking a hat with a peacock feather or a tiny stuffed bird? You, my friend, are clearly rolling in wealth, or at least trying to convince everyone you were. Men's hats too were stylish, but more than that, they were symbols of respectability. A bowler for the businessman, a top hat for the politician or gentleman of leisure. Hats weren't simply adornments, they were bold statements of identity, purpose, and social status. By the late 1800s, hat fashion had become almost competitive. Women would arrange their feathers and flowers so elaborately that they risked knocking their neighbors over in crowded parlors. Social gatherings often felt like hat shows, with everyone vying to outdo each other. And all the while, men quietly competed in height. Who could reach the tallest brim without tipping over? Game on. Simply put, 19th century hats weren't accessories, they were performances. The bigger, the bolder, the better. And that's why we're still fascinated by them today.
Your transportation to Chicago and the Roaring Twenties.
Chapter 3. The 20s and 30s. Cloche to panache. Step into the Roaring Twenties, the jazz age, when everything old got a modern makeover, including hats. Women ditched the towering Victorian bonnets for sleek, snug cloche hats that hugged the head so tightly you practically needed a shoehorn to squeeze them on. The cloche was more than just a hat, it was a statement. Bobbed hair peeking out from under a cloche screamed, "I'm independent, I dance all night, and I definitely don't care what my grandmother thinks." Pair it with fringe, beads, and a flapper dress, and you had a look that practically radiated rebellion and style. Cloches weren't plain either. They were decorated with ribbons, feathers, and brooches, but the style emphasized modern elegance over excess. The sleek shape meant women could dance, mingle, and slip into speakeasies without a hat disaster. Meanwhile, men were all about suave sophistication. The fedora dominated, tilted just so, paired with pinstripe suits and shiny shoes. It was a look of mobsters, movie stars, and anyone wanting to broadcast, I mean business. Without their hats, could Al Capone or Humphrey Bogart have pulled off the same aura of mystery and menace? Probably not. Hats made the man. But as the 1930s arrived, the mood shifted. The Great Depression forced fashion to get practical, but not boring either. Women's hats evolved into smaller, tilted styles, often perched at dramatic angles, with veils or feathers for flair. It was elegance on a budget, less sparkle, more subtle chic. Hollywood starlets like Greta Garbo and Marlene Dietrich made these hats glamorous, showing that even in hard times, headwear could be a statement of strength and style. Men's hats stayed essential too. The fedora held its ground, but the trilby and Homburg gained popularity, adding fresh twists to the classic style. Hats were still everyday wear. You didn't leave the house without one. Even as wallets shrank, hats held firm as symbols of dignity, aspiration, and identity. Hats from the 20s and 30s were fashionable, yes, but more than that, they were reflections of culture. They shifted from wild rebellion to refined resilience, proving once again that the hat on your head could say more than 1,000 words. And really, isn't that the ultimate hat trick?
Mid-century, modern, kind of rounded.
Sit by the fire pit and say mid-century modern a lot.
Chapter 4, Mid-Century Style, From Glam to Casual. By the 1940s and 50s, hats were still very much at the top of the fashion game. Women's hats have become mini architectural wonders. Wide brims, dramatic angles, and shapes that look like something from a sci-fi movie. Picture a flying saucer casually resting on someone's head. Elegant, impossible, and somehow practical. Sure, it kept the sun off your face, but it was more about making a statement. And then came the 1960s, when Jackie Kennedy's pillbox hat landed in history books. That tiny structured hat launched 1,000 imitations and cemented the idea that a small hat could make a huge cultural impact. Oh my. Men weren't slacking either. The fedora was still the king of sophistication. Hollywood's leading men like Cary Grant and Frank Sinatra basically turned every red carpet and movie scene into how to wear a fedora tutorial. Even everyday men reached for flat caps, trilbies, and other slightly more practical hats. It was a blend of fashion, function, and status. Pick the wrong hat, and the room noticed. Sure, mid-century hats had glamour and movie star sparkle, but the real game changer was the baseball cap. Fresh off the ball field, it started making plays in everyday life. Teens wore it like part of their uniform. Dads tossed it on for weekend ball games, and celebrities slipped it on between takes. It was practical, sporty, and slowly gearing up for the biggest win of all, world domination. By the late 50s, hat culture stood at a crossroads. Elegance, structure, and Hollywood glamour were still in play, but so was the rise of casual ease. A cap you could fold, stuff in your pocket, and wear to the ballpark. The polished fedora and the scrappy baseball cap were about to collide, and the world would never look at headwear the same again. Stitching it all together, mid-century headwear spoke volumes. Women's hats demanded attention, men's brims gave off understated swagger, and the baseball cap played the long game. Beyond fashion, every brim reflected the pulse of post-war life. So, which team are you on? Glam fedoras or ballpark caps? Drop me a comment. I'd love to know. And if you want to see more fun retro videos like this, please like, subscribe, and share. Thanks so much, and let's keep going.
Pirate hats!
Chapter 5, the 1970s and 80s, Funk, Flair, and Hat Rebellion. Welcome to the 1970s, the decade where hats truly went groovy. Women flocked to wide brim floppy hats, perfect for blocking the sun or doubling as an impromptu picnic mat. Think Stevie Nicks on stage, cloaked in lace and velvet hat, blending rock and roll power with storybook enchantment, as if rock and fairy tales collided under the spotlight. But berets, crocheted caps, and even cowboy hats joined the party, strutting their way into the disco era. Hats were about personality, flair, and a healthy dose of rebellion. The bigger, funkier, or more unexpected, the better. It was a time when your hat said, "Hey, I'm bold, I'm free-spirited, and yes, I might break into dance at any moment." As the 80s rolled in, hats got louder, brighter, and downright playful. Bucket hats, visors, and sequin caps exploded onto the scene. Rappers and hip-hop artists elevated the Congo bucket hat to cultural icon status. Suddenly, a simple hat could make a statement about style, rhythm, and street cred all at once. Meanwhile, trucker caps quietly started appearing thanks to promotional giveaways from brands. Back then, no one saw it coming. Those low-key trucker hats were destined to rule the fashion scene, from laid-back streetwear to A-list trendsetters. The 70s and 80s also celebrated hats as expressions of identity rather than status. No longer just symbols of wealth, authority, or refinement, hats became vehicles for attitude. Want to look edgy? Snap a bucket hat low over your eyes. Feeling sporty? Pop on a visor. Channel your inner rock star or bohemian goddess? Floppy or sequin hats had you covered. Hats didn't just top off an outfit, they were billboards for your personality to shine. And let's not forget pop culture moments. Madonna rocking different hats in music videos, Michael Jackson's iconic fedora gliding across stages, and the countless celebrities wearing hats to show off their quirks. By the end of the 80s, hats had fully embraced the concept of fun, rebellion, and individuality. Hats off to the 70s and 80s. Bursting with funky music, neon colors, and big hair, these decades transformed hats from polite accessories into bold, unforgettable declarations of identity. Of course, they were cultural icons, but more than that, they paved the way for every revival that followed. And there's no denying that back then, the louder the hat, the better the story.
Mom.
They are 90s cosmopolitans from the 90s.
Think 90s.
This is the 1990s.
Chapter 6, the 1990s, the hat renaissance. If the 80s were bold, the 90s were, well, eclectic, rebellious, and endlessly playful. Hats weren't just accessories anymore. They were badges of identity, mood indicators, and sometimes full-on personality statements. Let's start with the classics. Backwards baseball caps. From skateboarders to sitcom stars, flipping your cap backwards instantly said, "I'm cool, casual, and maybe just a little playful." Add in Blossom's giant floppy flower hat, and suddenly hats could be cute, quirky, and completely over the top at the same time. Hip-hop culture kept the Kangol alive thanks to icons like LL Cool J, who made a simple bucket hat a symbol of street credibility. But it wasn't just the smooth stylings of hip-hop. Grunge fans were making beanies their signature, slouchy, laid-back, and defiant. Nirvana, Pearl Jam, and the rest of the Seattle scene practically declared beanies the unofficial uniform of Generation Angst. Hats were visual shorthand for who you were and what music you listened to. Meanwhile, country music brought its own flair. Garth Brooks, along with the rise of country pop, revived the cowboy hat with mainstream flair, proving that hats could be both practical and iconic. Suddenly, a simple cowboy hat said, "I'm tough, I'm approachable, and yes, I might burst into a country ballad at any moment." And then there was the hip-hop starter cap phenomenon. The sticker had to stay on, no exceptions. It was less about the hat itself and more about announcing, "I know my culture, I know my style, and yes, this is how you do it right." Hats became visual tribal markers. Backwards caps for skaters, Kangles for hip-hop heads, beanies for grunge rebels, cowboy hats for country fans. Your hat literally announced your squad before you even spoke a word. Even pop culture embraced the Renaissance. TV shows, music videos, and movies were full of hats that defined characters instantly. From Cher and Dion's High School Chic and Clueless to hip-hop videos with oversized caps, the decade celebrated hats as part of a larger identity experiment. They were fun, bold, ironic, and absolutely central to the look of the 90s. So, the 90s weren't just about fashion experimentation, they were a hat renaissance. Hats became symbols of tribe, attitude, and self-expression. Whether you were tilting a Kangle, pulling a beanie down over your eyes, or flaunting a cowboy hat on stage, your hat told the world, "This is me, take it or leave it." Hats weren't optional, they were essential.
Alexa, play something from the early 2000s.
Wasn't there a probe called Nomad, launched in the early 2000s?
Chapter 7, the 2000s and beyond. Hats as style, character, and meme. By the 2000s, hats weren't exactly everyday essentials, but that didn't mean they were gone. Baseball caps reigned supreme, especially the logo-heavy varieties that shouted, "I belong to a team, a brand, or a vibe." Beanies stuck around too, riding the casual, slouchy, indie coffee shop wave. And then came the fedora revival, brief, bold, and quickly turned into a meme. Even as everyday hat wearing declined, hats continued to make waves in culture, fashion, and statement-making moments. Pharrell's giant brown Smokey the Bear hat at the Grammys? Instantly iconic. The Kentucky Derby? A playground for daring, elegant headpieces. Royal weddings? The fascinator game is stronger than ever. Hats had officially shifted from function to personality, spectacle, and cultural statement. And then there's a world of history and pop culture where hats are characters. The Mad Hatter in Alice in Wonderland literally made a career out of hat madness. The Cat in the Hat, Dr. Seuss, a striped top hat that signals mischief, chaos, and unstoppable whimsy. Charlie Chaplin's Bowler. Silent comedy wouldn't have been the same without that perfectly perched hat. Indiana Jones Fedora. Try imagining Harrison Ford running from boulders or snakes without it. Doesn't feel right, does it? The Great Gatsby. Whether Redford or DiCaprio, a man in a sharp suit and fedora defined jazz age cool. Michael Jackson's fedora and glove combo. Pure pop imagery. The hat was the moonwalk. Breaking Bad's Heisenberg. Walter White's black hat instantly signals menace, mystery, and intimidation. Cartoons and games. Mario's red cap, Ash Ketchum's Pokemon hat, Curious George's Man in the Yellow hat. They're practically trademarks, recognizable even without the characters' faces. And finally, the Wizard of Oz's hats. Pointy, dramatic, unforgettable. A hat can be magic itself. Here's the lesson pop culture teaches us. Hats make the look, not just top it off. They broadcast mood, identity, and sometimes, yes, even a touch of magic. Hats have gone from functional to unforgettable. Even when they aren't needed, a hat can tell a story, define a persona, or make headlines. Hats off to history.
Hats off to you, kid.
So keep it under your hat.
Chapter 8. Language of Hats. More than headwear. Hats didn't just live on our heads, they snuck into our language too. Think about it. We still say things like hats off to you when we want to show respect, even if no one's actually tipping a fedora. Back in the day, tipping your hat or taking it off entirely was a literal gesture of courtesy, recognition, or deference. That small nod of respect stuck around long after men stopped wearing fedoras to the grocery store. And then there's the idioms we still use today. Keep it under your hat, a way of saying keep it secret, originating in the 1800s when important information might literally be tucked under a hat. At the drop of a hat. From the 19th century, when dropping a hat was a signal to start a fight, a race, or some instant action. I'll eat my hat. First used in the 18th to 19th century, obviously nobody ate hats, but it was a colorful way to express certainty. Old hat, meaning outdated or boring, originally referring to hats that had been worn so long they lost shape or novelty. Wearing many hats refers to juggling multiple roles, much like people once literally owned different hats for different social or work occasions. Pass the hat comes from literally passing a hat around to collect donations, still used today in both formal and casual contexts. Even beyond idioms, hats became a shorthand for identity, status, and action. A baseball cap might shout casual and cool. A bowler might imply formality, and a dramatic fascinator hat could announce elegance or eccentricity before a word was even spoken. Hats have been more than accessories. They're symbols, gestures, and sometimes even secret keepers. So the next time you say hats off, or notice someone tipping their cap and saying they'll eat their hat, remember, you're participating in centuries of culture, etiquette, and storytelling. Hats shape how we speak, think, and even act. Mic drop. Chapter 9. Hats as identity, power, and pop culture. So what does all this hat history really tell us? Simple. Hats were never just hats. They've always been loud, clear statements about who you are, or who you want the world to think you are. From soldiers and suffragettes to gangsters, rock stars, and pop icons, a hat could signal power, rebellion, wealth, or simply unstoppable style. Think about it. Icons like Beyonce step out in that oversized formation hat, and she instantly commands attention and respect. Some hats don't just sit on your head, they become characters in their own right, telling stories, defining personalities, and cementing cultural moments. And fashion is funny like that. Hats that were once nerdy or uncool have cycled back into trendiness. Visors, once the quintessentially awkward accessory of the 80s and 90s, are now streetwear staples. Bucket hats went from tourist alert to high fashion must-haves. Even fedoras and flat caps, sometimes ridiculed in the early 2000s, have found new life in hip-hop, indie, and retro-inspired looks. Hats have a way of coming back around, proving that yesterday's fashion faux pas can be tomorrow's style statement. Here's the thing, a hat can be armor, a statement, or even a legacy. They've always done more than keep the sun off your face. They've shaped how we see each other, how we express ourselves, and how pop culture remembers us. Hats are identity, hats are power, And above all, hats are unforgettable.
Hold on to your hat. Hat, hold. Good.
So yeah, hats may not dominate our closets like they once did, but their history, seriously cool. They've been tools of power, fashion statements, symbols of rebellion, and sometimes just a clever place to stash your love letters or anything else. Next time you pull on a baseball cap or notice someone flaunting a cowboy hat, remember, you're not just seeing fabric and thread. You're glimpsing centuries of style, culture, and personality perched right on someone's head. And hey, tell me in the comments, what's the most memorable hat you've ever owned? Or the absolute wildest one you've ever worn? I'd love to know. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more retro deep dives into the quirky, the iconic, and the just plain fun sides of history. Hats off to the past and to your own future hat adventures. And as always, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next time.